Bigger is better when it comes to predators. At least that's what the YouTube algorithm suggests. And as many might say, throughout history there were no predators larger than the dinosaurs. But many would be wrong. Not only can we find larger predators than the dinosaurs, but we can find them swimming about during the very same periods the dinosaurs were being enormous on land. In this video, we're paying tribute to the largest prehistoric marine monsters of the dinosaur reign, and we'll compare them to their terrestrial counterparts to see how they hold up. And stick around because the last of them may have been the largest animal that has ever existed. Blue whales are perhaps the largest animals that have ever lived. They are upsettingly large, up to 30 meters long and a whopping 200 tons in weight. This sits somewhere between a fully laden Airbus A340 and a Boeing 777, but both of these passenger airlines technically comprise around 400 mammals, not just one big wet one. So the blue whale is an absolute unit. And while it may not be as fast as the 777, it too could get you from Manila to Seattle in a single leg if it was allowed to use some of the rivers. The point is, the blue whale is up there with some of the largest moving objects we commonly use, and they were doing it in all the world's oceans since the Pleistocene. And as mentioned, it's often said to be the largest animal that has ever lived. But this comes with a caveat. There's a huge sampling bias involved in that assessment, and what any honest scientist would actually say is that the blue whale is the largest animal that's ever lived that we know of. It's important to compare our experience of the blue whale with, say, that of a T-Rex. T-Rexes are some of the best studied of all extinct predators, and have some of the most complete and rich fossils of any dinosaur. They're not only well known because they were so cool and scary, they're also remarkably common fossils to find. T-Rex stomped around North America, one of the most studied lands for paleontology, for more than 7 million years during one of the most studied geological periods of the dinosaur reign, the Cretaceous. It left some of the largest and most comprehensive fossils of any dinosaur, and its collection represents one of the most complete of any dinosaur genus. And there are only around 50 or so on record. Certainly fewer than 100, even when including the most fragmented specimens. That's 50 solid examples of an animal that lived precisely where and when paleontologists are looking most closely. 50 specimens of an animal that lived for more than 35 times the duration that anatomically modern humans have been around, and perhaps 4 or 5 more times as long as the blue whale has been around. And of those 50-ish, a total of 2 are more than 90% complete. Compare that, of course, to the blue whale, and we can see how much more information we have access to. For one thing, we humans are personally, deliberately, and tangibly responsible for the death of around 400,000 of them, just in the last 150 years. And we can and do follow the remaining 20,000 or so of them around with boats and cameras. The point is, we are much more likely to be accurate in determining the largest size of a blue whale than the largest size of any animal during the dinosaur times. And the chances that the largest T-Rex fossil was the largest of its kind around are close to 0. So with that in mind, let's look at the largest monsters we know of, from fossils, and consider first of all how they compared with their contemporary dinosaur predators, and how big they may have realistically gotten. And let's begin on the turf of the T-Rex. By the Cretaceous, the oceans have been through many iterations of enormous marine predators, as we'll soon discuss. None of them dinosaurs, but all of them still reptiles. Lizards in the Cretaceous were finally around by this time, and this was their period to shine. 2 particular examples to begin our list are both in the mosasaur family. At number 5 sits the horrific Tylosaurus. This genus boasts the so-called largest mosasaur on display, with a 13-meter-long specimen. And while specimens of this genus max out at an estimated 14 meters, at least one estimate has suggested that older individuals could potentially have made it up to 20 meters long. Now, this doesn't make it true, and the display case has since been found to have more bones in it than it should, so chances are that it wasn't quite as big as its family member Mosasaurus hoffmanii, whose specimens appear to be larger on average. Both Tylosaurus and Mosasaurus were true lizards, and likely close relatives of the Komodo dragon and other varanid lizards around today. Only unlike the Komodo dragon, Mosasaurus was originally said to have reached 18 meters long, This is one of the largest marine reptiles known, which seems a bit redundant to point out in an essay on this exact topic, but nonetheless is worth adding for emphasis. The majority of what's inferred about the species, and indeed the genus as a whole, comes from bits and pieces of skull bones and a lot of guesswork. Unrelated smaller species have better records and have been used as a basis for comparison, but speculation necessarily abounds in such a dearth of solid evidence. So, the smartest people on the topic once said that the largest fragment from the largest specimen suggests a beast of 18 meters long, with powerful jaws, full of robust teeth, and all the killing instinct you'd expect from a gargantuan swimming Komodo dragon. But while almost all of that remains true, more recent estimates have dropped that length down as far as 13 to 14 meters. Still a pretty scary prospect, but perhaps mosasaurs made up for this shrinkage with another weapon. A fun little extension of this speculation comes from the fairly recent discovery that varanids, those are the monitor lizards, are all venomous. Not quite as dangerously so as the hollow-fanged mambas and cobras, but in the more primitive style of a venom that involves grooved fangs, creating channels for toxic saliva to enter into wounds. And mosasaur teeth also show these grooves. So could the largest marine predators of the Cretaceous have been venomous too? Perhaps their size would have rendered this unnecessary, but it is fun to think about. But how did they compare to the dinosaur contemporaries? The largest dinosaur predators of the Cretaceous were T-Rex and Spinosaurus. The largest T-Rexes are around 14 meters long. Spinosaurus inches them out with a length of around 15 or 16 meters, depending on the estimates. But Spinosaurus was lighter at around 7 tons, and possibly semi-aquatic. And even T-Rex was only 8 or 9 tons in mass. A relatively small Mosasaurus at around 10 meters long would have weighed around 10 or 11 tons, so an 18-meter monster could have weighed 40 to 60 tons. However, while a lack of evidence opens the door for even larger animals to have existed, it can also have the opposite effect. Estimates of size based on skulls can be entirely wrong, and some now think that the Mosasaurus had a far larger head proportionally, and therefore would have topped out at around 13 meters, with a more serpentine body than was once thought. This would of course have made it much lighter. Still, with the most conservative estimates, these were heavier animals than the dinosaurs around at the time, and just as lethal. But let's jump back a period and see if that changes. In the Jurassic, it wasn't lizards that dominated the oceans, but reptiles called Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs. Bony fish were around at this time, and some, like Ichthyosaurs, became the largest known bony fishes, reaching almost 50 tons and 17 meters in length. But these were filter feeders, so let's get back to the predatory reptiles. Pliosaur and Plesiosaur fossils are equally confused and limited, but there are some real corkers, many from Great Britain. 150 million years ago, that land was under warm and shallow waters, and swimming about in these death traps were the largest pliosaurs known, Pliosaurus. Most samples from this genus suggest an animal of around 12 tons in weight, and around 11 meters long, but some exceptional finds push this up far greater. Upper estimates from a very limited sample reach almost 15 meters in length, with apparently no mention of how heavy that would make it. The species of this one isn't yet known, but similar animals like Kronosaurus queenslandicus had spent some time as the largest marine reptile known, at around 13 meters long, until it was surpassed by Mosasaurus hoffmanni. This was longer than any confirmed plesiosaur, despite many of the latter having very funky snake-like necks. And so number 2 on this list is neither a plesiosaur or a pliosaur, but a dolphin-shaped ichthyosaur. Ichthyosaurs were still around in the Jurassic, and in fact would extend well into the Cretaceous period. But while the line as a whole was giving way after their heyday in the Triassic to the new generation of marine monsters, there were still some very strong competitors. Perhaps the strongest known from this period was Temnodontosaurus. This would have been a 10 to 12 meter long predator that had enormous eyes, a very elongated snout, and a dolphin-like tail fluke. These animals were built for speed, and would have likely chased prey with all the ferocity of a bluefin tuna. And perhaps being more robustly built than their pliosaur counterparts, they may have not only been faster, but much denser and heavier as well. So how did these two compare with the Jurassic predators on land? As with marine monsters, terrestrial predators were smaller in the Jurassic than they were in the Cretaceous. And while the top dog on land hasn't fully been established, both Allosaurus and Torvosaurus rank pretty highly. Torvosaurus was around 10 meters long and up to 5 tons in weight, and the largest definitive Allosaurus was 8.5 meters and weighed less than 2 tons. So again, as you'd expect from animals living with fewer gravitational limitations, marine monsters win again. But let's see if this pattern extends into the Triassic. So far, we've covered 4 of the largest monsters of the dinosaur age: 2 mosasaurs, a pliosaur, and an ichthyosaur. And the largest of the lot, even using the outdated exaggerated size estimates, was nothing compared to the largest blue whale. Granted, the blue whale isn't a predator, at least not in the way we want our sea monsters to be. But its relevance does come into play here as we discuss the largest marine monster of the dinosaur period, and perhaps an animal so frighteningly big it would have surpassed the largest blue whale to have ever existed. And we'll come to that in a second. Just before we do though, here's a quick moment of gratitude to everyone who's supporting the channel already, and a reminder that you can always continue to do so by liking our videos, leaving your feedback in the comments, and subscribing to the channel for more. We aim to post twice a week, so if you're not seeing them on your feed, please hit the notification button so you'll be alerted as and when they arrive. Now, what sort of beast rivals the blue whale but hunts like a tuna? Ichthyotitan may well be it. Because back in the Triassic, dinosaurs were still figuring things out. Even by the late Triassic, they'd really only made it to around 8 or 9 meters long, and those were the sauropods. Jurasaurus might have been the largest theropod of the time, and this monster topped out at less than 200 kilograms, and perhaps only 6 meters long. But ichthyosaurs had been doing this a whole lot longer than dinosaurs by this time, and despite lasting well into the late Cretaceous, it was the Triassic period during which they truly owned the world's oceans. And of them all, nobody owned the oceans more than Ichthyotitan. This monstrous raptorial ichthyosaur was a member of the line of ichthyosaurs that would disappear at the end of the Triassic, or at the beginning of the Jurassic, and was therefore an example of one last hurrah for its family. And what an example! The only confirmed specimen is a partial jawbone that indicates an animal of around 25 meters long. But there are other finds too, still being identified, some of which would push that estimate up to 35 meters long if they're confirmed. An animal of this size could easily have hit more than 300 tons in weight. That's 100 tons heavier than the largest blue whale. It's worth pointing out that these upper estimates may instead belong to a so far undefined genus and are currently nicknamed Ostcolossus. But either way, there be monsters. Here was a dominant marine giant, the size of the longest blue whales, perhaps even substantially larger, that actively hunted large animals at a time when dinosaurs were still struggling to defend themselves against the ancestors of crocodiles. Before dinosaurs even made it into the apex predator category, there was a monster in the oceans perhaps larger than any animal on Earth ever known. And all of this comes from a tiny fragment of fossil. Assuming the size estimates of Ichthyotitan are correct, it's almost a guarantee that the one individual found did not represent the largest of its kind. Even if it represented an average, the largest animal that ever lived could have exceeded that of the blue whale substantially. And being an active predator, we're left to only imagine the monsters that would have filled its belly. So while dinosaurs would one day become the largest monsters on land, the oceans would always belong to ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs were perhaps the most successful marine vertebrates to have ever lived, spanning a period of time almost 200 million years long, and it appears producing the largest vertebrates on Earth. And if you stick around on this channel, we will be releasing a video specifically about them quite soon. The ocean is home to countless mysteries, even today. But given the 500 million years since the first apex predators emerged in it, there are almost infinitely more to be found among the prehistoric giants. If you're wondering about some of the terrors we didn't mention in this video, check out our pieces on Liopleurodon, Dunkleosteus, or the giant-shelled squid Camarasaurus. As for this one, that's all for now. Thanks again for watching, and please don't forget to hit the notification button for the next one. See you next time.